Welcome to the real world. My name is Caleb Witten. I am the young adult pastor at Bedico Baptist Church, and this podcast is going to be a summer-long series where really, hopefully, our goal with this podcast is the same with our whole ministry, is that we would help college students and young adults follow Jesus, some for the very first time, but not just follow Jesus, but to follow Jesus deeply. Another goal of this podcast is really what we're going to accomplish in conversation, is cover situations that young adults typically deal with and provide guidance for how to deal with them in a God-glorifying way. And then finally, the ultimate goal with these conversations is that we would have fun conversations with cool guests about things that they are passionate about. We're going to be talking about things like today, missed expectations. Not necessarily saying that Cailee's passionate about missed expectations, but it's something that she has experience with. We're going to be going into a series on work as worship, and we've got a whole bunch of different guests that I've plotted out for the summer that's going to be really exciting, really fun. So make sure that you continue to listen to these podcasts. I hope that you enjoy this one, and that leads me to introducing our very first guest. This is my lovely wife, and your name is?
Cailee Witten.
Yes. So Cailee and I have been married for almost 2 years. It is 1 year and 10 months.
Yeah.
And 11.
Well, 11 months now. No,
10 months, almost
Math.
11 months, like 10 and a
Yeah.
half-ish months. Anyways, we met in college, fell in love at Louisiana Tech, got married right out of college, moved to Ponchatoula, Louisiana, took this job as the young adult pastor here, and since then we've bought a house, you've had a baby, we're raising our daughter Mary Louise, and it is quite the journey. It is never a dull moment, every day's a new adventure, but it has been just such an awesome journey to be able to walk through together, see how the Lord is refining us as disciples. But I want to ask you, Cailee, first question, what's something that the Lord is teaching you right now?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, so we are in a new season with a 2-month-old. And so I feel like the big thing that the Lord's been teaching me in this season is his nearness. Most of my days now is being by myself with the child. And even postpartum, there are days where mentally it's a little tough. And so God is, through his Spirit, has made it very evident and very clear that he's right here with me. Like, almost like I've been able to feel him, or visually be like, he's right here. Like in those moments where, Mary Louise might be having a rough time and, I feel alone or in a bad moment. But the Holy Spirit has made it clear that he's near to the brokenhearted, and he's right here with me. It doesn't mean that he's going to take away pain. It doesn't mean he's going to take away heartbreak, but it means that he's with me through it. So that's the main thing right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's something that I've been able to kind of watch from a different perspective, being out of the house and at work. Something that I'm pretty constantly praying for is for just the Lord to be near to you, because I know that can feel isolating, that can feel lonely even at times, especially whenever I'm gone for 6, 7, 8 hours a day sometimes. I'm grateful that's your answer, that the Lord is answering that prayer.
For sure.
So that's cool. But kind of getting into this topic of missed expectations and getting into what it means for maybe our desires to look differently than God's plan. We are going to have a conversation about your story in particular of how the Lord has changed your heart based on where you were planning on going, or maybe even what you felt like God's will was for your life, and eventually getting to the point of where we are today of God's will actually being a lot different than God's will staying the same, but his will being revealed to us in a way that is different than we thought it would be.
Plans,
yeah. And I want to just begin with this verse in 2 Thessalonians. I don't even remember the specific reference. I believe it's like 11 or 12, but it talks about, or Paul talks about there, how God's will for our life is sanctification. And so many college and young adults ask this question so often. I mean, that's not just isolated to that one specific age group, but that demographic does seem to wrestle with this idea more of, God, what do you want for me? What is your will for my life? And maybe we're even asking the wrong question. Like the Bible's clear in that scripture in 2 Thessalonians that his will for our life is sanctification. It's to become more like him. But maybe the question we should be asking is God, do my desires and what I want for my life, does that align with what you're calling me to do and where I'm going to go in life?
Right.
And so I want you to kind of tell your story of like coming to Louisiana Tech, like start in your senior year of high school, leading towards your decision of going to Tech, and then not only that, but also like how you got plugged into church, all the way up until your surrender to ministry.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm from Franklinton, Louisiana, a small town, South Louisiana. And when it was time for me to decide where I was going to school, going to college, it was a decision between staying home and going to Southeastern Louisiana University or moving and going to Louisiana Tech in Ruston. And I had plans to major in kinesiology. And so I toured the schools and that department specifically. And really, I just woke up one morning and I was like, I'm going to Tech. That's what I'm going to do. I'm leaving. And so, so that's kind of how that happened. I moved, of course, in August, I think, to Ruston. And I wasn't necessarily planning on getting super involved in ministry. I knew I was going to find a church to go to on Sundays, but not necessarily to like dive all in. And so I had a random roommate because I didn't know many people in Ruston, and that was a God thing because she was very much intent on I am going to get involved in church, and so the BCM that first week at school, they were having this big event called the Luau, and basically it's free food, free t-shirts, there's live music and like all this fun stuff. And so she was like, let's go. So we went. Of course, had fun, met lots of freshmen, and then we were playing volleyball outside with a random group of people. And this guy came up to us and was like, hey, are y'all freshmen? And we said, yes. And he said, have you heard about this thing called Journey? And we were like, no, what is that? He said, it's a freshman Bible study. What's your names again? I'm going to sign you up. And we were like, oh, okay, cool. Like, that's just how it's going to be now. And so, we started that freshman Bible study that next week. And that was the first time that I saw people my own age, like, not just having Jesus as their Savior, knowing the gospel that he died and rose again to save us from sin. But that was the first time I saw people my own age laying their lives down as Jesus is Lord over their life. And I had not experienced that myself. And so, of course, the Lord was moving on me in that next month or two. And, I was in my dorm room after the BCM's worship night called Elevate one night, and I was journaling, and the Lord made it very clear, like, you need to surrender to me as Lord. And so I did, and continued to grow that freshman year. And I did plug into a church and served there. And then 2 years later, God moved me from that church to Temple Baptist in Ruston. where I got highly involved in children's ministry and loved it. And then I was also involved in discipleship groups at Temple, and through a series of events my junior year in 2021, February, the Lord made it so clear that I was called to ministry. Now, at that point, I had been in school for 3 years in kinesiology.
Yeah.
My plans were, since junior year of high school, to be a physical therapist, to be the breadwinner of my family, and yeah, I was set on it.
Yeah. By this point, we were engaged. By the point you got called into ministry, and so we had already kind of
had that in our brain.
Yeah, like we had kind of formulated what our life would be. And I mean, you want to talk about missed expectation. I was marrying a physical therapist, and then in a moment it was a children's minister. And I don't know if you've looked at the average income between those two, but they're not even similar. So so you get called into ministry at a midweek on Wednesday night. This was the church that we really feel like God used in our lives to mature us a lot spiritually and really show us what it looks like to do ministry together. I was on staff at this church as a worship leader at Temple, and we would serve together every chance we got. But really, I feel like for us in that season, God kind of pulled our ministries apart. Like we had very different goals in ministry, and since then it's come back together, and we basically do everything together now. But in that moment, I believe that it was necessary for you to recognize your own calling to ministry apart from mine. Like we were already getting married, and I'm so thankful that God did have us in those different ministries to where you could recognize not only that you were just going to be a pastor's wife, but you're a minister in your own right. And God has used you in huge ways beyond just children's ministry. Actually, now children's ministry is a very small, very, very minimal part of what you do in ministry. But the Lord nonetheless has been glorified through all that. And so you were called into ministry in this way through some teaching that we heard there at midweek, and going from, I know that there's people that are wrestling with this. We have students in our ministry that have wrestled with this very similar story. Going from the idea of physical therapy school, your parents and whole family know this process. They know where you're going to go. You've worked super hard to keep a super high GPA. You've made friends. You've networked yourself. You've worked at clinics at that point. And then God shifts everything and shows you that he has something different for you. How did that affect you mentally, spiritually, emotionally? Like when that moment came up, like there's obviously the joy of a surrender to the call of ministry, but then there's this whole other life that now there might even be a sense of grief. Like walk me through what that feels like.
For sure. Of course, like he started that call and I was terrified. Yeah, it was like, no, but I planned this. Like, no, but financial security. No, but I don't want to disappoint my parents. And also the factor of like, okay, well, I've been determined not to change my major since the beginning, and I haven't. And now I don't know what to do. And, I wanted control. I was a planner, still kind of am, still working on that. But also just I had to be humbled in the way of my mom was always the breadwinner in our family, and in my brain I was going to be it too. And so I remember after like voicing to you, I might be being called to ministry. And then after that last midweek service that literally Chad, the interim college pastor, after he spoke, it was literally like directly pointed to what I all the questions I had, and just literally knocking down all of the excuses that I was making up in my brain not to surrender.
Yeah.
And we had even you were trying so hard not to speak into it and persuade me that I am called to ministry or not. But that specific night, I remember I was literally laying on my bed on the phone with you, and I guess you were driving home or something, but you were literally like, "What's holding you back? Don't think that I don't want you to follow your calling because we need to be financially secure in the future or whatever else excuse I had." And it was so clear. I remember shaking, and I was like, what is mom gonna say or dad gonna say? But and honestly, ever since I've surrendered, and once I did start telling my parents, my family, people I grew up with, that my plans have changed, there hasn't been any pushback. They're my family are supportive. Of course, they might have questions about future, but that's
and they
normal.
did. Yeah, absolutely.
And so, it was the Lord. It was scary, and some moments still are a little I don't know what's going to happen, but the Lord, He calls you to things so you can trust Him, not necessarily so you have the answers.
Right. Do you feel like since you made that decision, have you experienced any regret over not going to PT school or anything like that?
No. After the fact, and some of my friends, of course, I was in kinesiology for 3 or 4 years. They moved on to PT school, and after seeing just the trials they endured, I was like, I don't think I could make it. I could, but just my whole mindset, starting off marriage and everything, would have been very different if I was in school. And there's moments I still enjoy that kind of stuff, but I am definitely affirmed that that's not it for me.
Yeah. And that's the last misexpectation that we've had since then. So this is the end of the episode, and that's a lie. That's a lie.
No.
We have. I wish that it just went up and up,
great.
and everything was so clear after that of where God was leading and what you were supposed to do. But I do want to speak to something real quick that you brought up about me allowing you to process that individually. And this is a hot take that I have for Christian couples in dating and engagement. Is if you are not married, if you are not one, allow your significant other to process what the Lord is doing in their life on their own until they're ready for you to speak into it. Because it's impossible. It is literally impossible for you to be able to speak unbiasedly on either end of it into that person's situation. And while it might be helpful, and eventually it was helpful for me to be able to say something, but if early on in the process of processing through what this call to ministry meant for you, if I would have just been hey, don't worry about it, we're good. If I believe that it took a lot more faith for you to truly surrender without me saying hey, we're good, with me praying through, because on the other end of it, at this point, you're going to be my wife. We were engaged, and I knew that what was once a very comfortable lifestyle that we were going to live was no longer the reality, that things were going to be a bit more difficult. And they've proven that it has been a bit more difficult than if you would have gone to PT school. But the Lord has been so good through all of it, and never once, throughout that whole process, the Lord gave me a piece of hey, the same way that I've called you, I've called her. Yeah. And that has been just a huge thing for me as a spouse. But in that moment, as a fiance, the Lord speaking to me and kind of making me slow to speak towards that situation, which is not my gut instinct. I'm very much a problem solver, and I want to speak to stuff immediately. But in that moment, and that wasn't the only instance in college where this happened, and even now in marriage, there's certain instances where I let you take, a beat to think through it on your own before we discuss it. But I think that it is so dangerous for particularly young dating or engaged couples to begin to speak into each other's situation because it's going to affect the other one regardless. And if what I didn't want was you to feel like your decision or your surrender to ministry was dependent upon our relationship.
For sure, yeah.
And that happens so often in not just ministry callings, but different callings that the Lord places on our life, that we ask people to speak into situations that it affects them immediately. And I didn't want that to be our story. I wanted you to be able to process it and truly come to that moment where it's like, okay, God, I'm giving up on PT. And then I could go, are you ready to give up on are you ready for us to do this together? And like, I think the Lord has blessed that in a huge way. But anyways, I want to keep on moving forward. You've surrendered to ministry almost or in your last year of college, and since college, you graduate 3.9 GPA, summa cum laude, and and I always make fun of Cailee for this because she worked so hard in college and I didn't. And that we're actually getting into that into next week's episode. But you've had several different jobs since you graduated from college. You did still work at a PT clinic. So the shift from physical therapy, like full-blown DPT, didn't go like children's minister.
No.
It went DPT PTA. Yeah. And so we're still in the same field, but you're going to take some time. We got married. You're going to take some time and just work in the field and see if this is really where you want to go before you enroll in school. And that didn't work out.
No.
But
I tried so hard to fight it, though.
Well, and I think that it's also in that season, I associate that season of you working at Dynamic as such a season of joy.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of refinement and processing that went on through that, but you made some friends that you've stuck with, and even was able to do a lot of ministry at that clinic as well.
With a lot of women.
Right. Yeah. And so you went from there to a head baker at a coffee shop that we helped open, and you were there for just a short,
then I got pregnant.
Right. And then you got pregnant. And so all these moves are continued missed expectation of, I think this is going to be it.
I think it's going to stick.
Right. PTA doesn't feel right. Missed expectation. You move to the bakery. This could be it. Like, this is what you love baking. You're passionate about it. And you're making more money, and wasn't it? Missed expectation. And you move on to substituting.
Yeah.
And
in preschool and in school systems.
Yes. And so you move on to this other career, which seems kind of like a good backup plan almost, especially at like the preschool, which was at First Baptist Covington. So it was ministry and teaching, offering some sort of financial security, although we had no grasp of what our finances should be at that point. You're pregnant at that point, and really, at the end of the day, after you give birth, another missed expectation of that career. We thought this could be it. This could be where God is leading full time, and recognizing it's kind of hard to pay bills like this. And so at that point, through all that, let's just take all three of those for the sake of time. How did that journey shape your trust in God?
Yeah. Well, a lot of the trust part, like, hit me of I wasn't placing my trust in the Lord when we were freaking out over finances. Like, are we going to make it to the next mortgage, and that was when the Lord was like, do you trust me or not? Like, do you even, since I'm still trying to figure out, like, Lord, are you calling me to a specific career? If so, like, what does that look like? Can you give that to me? How can I provide for us, and all these things? But ultimately, the Lord has made it clear through each of those, like, stop looking so much to the future
Mm.
and trust me in the now. Like, what have I
Yeah.
provided for you today?
That's good.
And like, can you be thankful? Which is so convicting. But yeah, and even like stop trying to compromise. Like the PTA, that was definitely me trying to compromise with what I had planned and what his will was for me as far as ministry, and trying to like marry the two. But that's not what he calls us to. He calls us to completely surrender our plans
Yeah.
and follow what he has for us. And so, yeah, he's just, through that whole season, going from one job to the next was a season of wandering for me. A season of not really, like, I know the Lord's leading me somewhere, but I'm not quite there yet. But I'm also like taking my eyes off of what he has in the ministry he's called me to try to make things work.
Yeah.
And jumping ahead of his will is a lot of what I did in that season as well. Of, okay, I think I have peace about it. Let's do it. Instead of waiting, not just taking the first opportunity that came that paid bills or, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had all these moments of missed expectations. You got pregnant, and then you became a mother.
Yeah.
So that's what happens at the end of pregnancy is
Right. Yeah.
the baby comes out,
crazy.
and now you're mom.
New title.
Yeah. And does this, so you look back at the past almost 4 years from now, I guess 3 years really. You look back at the past 3 years of just these prayers for God, what do you have me? What do you have for me? What do you have for me? What do you have for me? And it's been this pursuit of some sort of consistency that we feel like might last. And still in this season, as far as vocationally, we don't know what you're going to do. If you're going to go back to work, I'm sure at some season of our life you will, but at this moment, the Lord has provided in a way that you don't have to, that you can stay at home. But I want to ask you, like, does this season that you're in now as mom feel like an answer to those prayers and those missed expectations?
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel almost like grounded.
Yeah.
Like, God, in the past however many years, like, I've asked those questions of, like, God, just give me the purpose of what you want me to do. And, you know, lead me to where I need to be. And after she was born, and we kind of figured out parenting a little bit, like
2 months in, we still have no idea, but we know
right.
just the surface of what we're doing.
Just how to keep her alive,
right?
And ourselves alive. But as soon, like, when she was born and I did become a mother, there is this sense of like peace and purpose of, like, you know, all these years you've been waiting and waiting and waiting, like, here it is. Like, this is what I've called you to in this season, and it's lasting. And, like, my purpose is to raise her up in the Lord.
Right, yeah.
Our purposes.
Right.
But, like, that's ministry. Also, I'm getting to do ministry. I'm getting to meet with girls. And, you know, I may not be as present at the late night stuff.
Right, yeah.
I'm able to.
And even if my body's there, I'm not always mentally there at the late night stuff.
But yeah, I feel like the Lord has been very kind to remind me of what my purpose is. And like, I'm continuing to have to trust him, of course, like with our future. And I don't know what the next day holds, you know, with a 2-month-old. And so.
And one thing that I think that is unique about this season, and maybe even this answer, because I do feel like the two might be associated, but they're not the same as far as like what God has called you to do vocationally and being a mom.
Right.
But I do believe, and something that I was just praying on like this morning as we were preparing for this episode, is that though we don't have the answer of what you'll do vocationally, God has provided a lasting title and a lasting job
Yeah.
for the both of us for the rest of our life as parents. So no matter what we do vocationally, God has provided that consistency in being a mom and a dad. Like it's even though I've had this job throughout the whole period, it has been also like that's part of being one is as you ride this roller coaster, I'm riding
You
it
are
too,
too,
you
yeah.
know, and just seeing another aspect of the Lord's provision within this journey of missed expectations and different career paths. Like the Lord has proven Himself good
Yeah.
and faithful and
Provider.
and like we have Mary Louise for as long as the Lord leaves her here. And like that's such a blessing. And I've been able to see you come alive as a mother. And I want to be careful with this conversation, particularly whenever it comes to speaking towards Christian girls. Is motherhood is not a promise.
It's not the end all be all either, you know.
Marriage is not a promise.
Right.
Like if you get married, then that is a promise. And once you have a baby, it is a promise. Like you will never, regardless of if she's even here or not, Lord willing, we have her for the rest of our life. But regardless of what happens to Mary Louise, you will always be her mother. And I think some people can create this expectation of, I'll do what I need to do until I can get married and have a baby, and then I'll just be a stay-at-home mom. And I think that I want to make sure that we say here that, like, our hands are not closed now that you're a mom and that you're able to stay at home. Like, our hands are still very much open to wherever the Lord leads next. But I think that through this journey of missed expectations, we've been able to learn a few different things. But before I even get there, I want to talk about just a connection in Scripture that I think that maybe even we haven't even talked about, but I recognize this morning as well. Like right now, our small group's reading through the story of Joshua. And Joshua is the leader of the Israelites that actually gets them to the promised land. And as we're journeying through Joshua, we're about halfway through it now, we see that the journey towards the promised land is never just a straight path in. It's not just Joshua leading the Israelites across the Jordan and they're in the promised land, right? Like there's a whole bunch of battles. There's a whole bunch of requests from the Lord for Joshua to accomplish. There's a whole bunch of twists and turns and battles and highs and lows and victories and losses and so many different components of the journey to the promised land where once Joshua gets there, he can recognize that he's still the God of the promise and that he always will remain faithful. And regardless of what the journey looks like to get there, once you get to the promise, the answer of the promise, you're able to recognize his faithfulness in the past. And for us in this season, it's, you know, as we have Mary Louise now, it's able to see his faithfulness in the past because of where we're at now. But it's also a reminder that for us, we don't feel like we're in the promised land. We don't feel like this journey's over. We don't feel like we have made it. But looking at the story of Joshua and how eventually they do get to the promised land and they do see God's faithfulness, we're available or we're able to see in that story that even through the journeys, the highs and lows, the wins and losses, the hard battles and the good times, he's faithful there too. And I think that was something that I thought about this morning of we can look back with hindsight 2020 and see how God was faithful, but we can also look forward in the future, but also knowing today that he is faithful and always will be faithful. A few things just to kind of wrap up. Do you have anything else that you want to share about that story of missed expectations? Any kind of final remarks on that before I give just a few different points?
I mean, just even from that very first story of being called to ministry, everything after it happens and the Lord calls us to surrender in a new way or follow him in a new way, trust him in a new way, it just makes sense. Like if I was a physical therapist, our lives would not be like this.
No.
Like our ministry would not, or I wouldn't be involved in our ministry as much. Like there would be so many different factors.
We wouldn't be parents. I mean, we wouldn't
Yeah,
we wouldn't
you
have
never
that
know.
capacity to.
And so just like that move made sense.
Yeah.
With us getting married and our careers aligning, and then all the way to now, like every move the Lord asked me to make and I was terrified to make, like hindsight, like what you're saying, looking back, like it just makes sense. Like it just makes perfect sense of, oh, I understand.
Yeah.
And some things I don't. Trust me, some things I
Yeah.
don't understand. But I just see the Lord's plan, his bigger purpose and bigger plan playing out, looking back at the hard moves that he's asked us to make.
Yeah.
And so
100%.
it helps me trust him more now.
Yeah. So the last three things that I want to say are kind of, as I looked back on our journey of these missed expectations in your career path, I thought back and thought, what are areas that I know now that if I would have applied it then would have made the sting of a missed expectation less. And the first one that I thought of was faith that God's in control.
Right.
Whenever we encounter a missed expectation, whenever the bottom falls out, for lack of a better term, we can tailspin in disbelief of this is how it's always supposed to been. This is where I was supposed to go. This is what I was supposed to do. This is who I was supposed to marry. This is what my parents told me I had to do.
Right.
And whenever it all falls out from the bottom of us, we can crumble in that situation. And as I look back on the situations that we encountered, or specifically that you encountered, if some of those hard conversations, those hard nights, whenever it was kind of all encompassing of what the heck is going on, like if we would have had faith in those moments that God was in control, it would have made that sting a lot less painful.
For sure.
And then the next thing was recognition of the moment can help minimize the sting of missed expectations. And what I mean by that is if we can see a moment as just what it is, as the moment, then we will recognize that like this is not an all-encompassing thing. And that's so hard to focus on when you're in it. But I think that this process really has kind of helped me gain a perspective. And I've even said it as you've gone through these different career changes of like, we'll try this for now. Like this is working for now. Like, and I think that particularly for college and young adults, it's a big deal for young adults to feel like they are going into the career path that they will be in for the rest of their life, or that the person that they're dating in college will be there forever, or that whatever it might be, the college that they wanted to go to has got to be the place that they go. The place that they want to live has got to be the place that they want to live. And recognize that every situation that we make, tomorrow's never promised. And so even for me as a pastor and a minister, like I prayed that the Lord would allow me to serve the local church for the rest of my career. But for me, I can recognize now, especially after walking through this all with you, is that it might not be my forever that I serve the local church. There's very likely a season where you're working in the local church and I am in some other different capacity. And being able to recognize that my reality now is not always going to be my reality forever can help minimize the sting of those missed expectations, whether they be good or bad. Sure. And then finally, as I looked back on our journey, I thought about how much other stuff happened in our lives, regardless of the missed expectations of your career. And it led me to think about that joy, the joy of the Lord in our sanctification, that can minimize the sting of missed expectation,
For sure.
right? Like if we look at the past 3 years and how have been moments of hurt, confusion, of wondering what is next, wondering what is right, and wondering where we should go. And that does not always feel joyful. But whenever I look at the overall, I guess, story arc of our past 3 years as a couple, as a married couple, and now as parents, like there is so much joy of the Lord through all of it. The salvations that we've been able to see, the ministries we've been able to either begin or continue, the house that we've been able to buy, the friends and relationships that we've been able to make, and the child that we've been able to raise this far. Like through all of those missed expectations, again, that can feel very all-encompassing and almost damaging in the moment. Recognizing the joy surrounding him, that can definitely minimize the sting of missed expectations.
I mean, that's what the devil wants, is to distract us from the joy that the Lord's given us, and only focus on what we think he hasn't.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think I kind of think of that phrase or that saying that's like, whenever God closes a door, he opens a window. And I don't love that phrase. Yeah. I think whenever God closes a door, there's another door. You just got to, I feel like,
wait or
right, yeah.
Like pursue him.
Don't try to make it work.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of what that saying is speaking towards. And we've definitely tried to just make it work.
Oh, yeah.
And we've realized that, like, whenever God closes the door, you just stand there, leave it closed, and start looking around for a door. Look for the door. Anyways, I think that your story has a lot of beauty in it. I'm grateful to be a part of it. And I've loved being able to see how the Lord has molded you into a better disciple of his through this process, knowing that you don't deal with change great, knowing that you like to have a pretty steadfast plan. It's unique that the Lord has chosen this season for you to be not that. So I do believe that at some point the Lord will make very clear what it is that he wants you to do, what he wants us to do. And hopefully this podcast is an answered prayer for someone that's wondering, God, what am I supposed to do? And the answer to that is, like, you don't have to know. You don't have to have it all figured out the next 40 years of your life right now while you're 20-something. Like, it's silly to expect that. But understand that God does have a call on your life, and that his will for your life as a teacher, as an accountant, as a farmer, as a pastor, as a preschool minister, as a stay-at-home parent, his will for your life is always sanctification. So that's really where I think we need to land. I think this was a great episode, a great introductory episode. They will be launched every Wednesday for the next 13 weeks. So we love you. We're thankful that you have joined us on the podcast today, and be sure to look forward to other episodes coming up this summer. All right. Bye.